My grandmother stood at the head of a table long enough to seat 20 and smiled the way she always smiled, like she was doing you a favor just by looking at you. There were 80 people in that room. 80. I counted them the way I count everything, the way my mother taught me, before I understood why counting mattered. Cordelia Hargrove had rented the fellowship hall at First Methodist, the one with the oak panels, and the portrait of Reverend Caldwell above the fireplace, and she had filled it with every cousin, neighbor, and church friend she had ever collected in 74 years of living in the same town. She tapped her glass with a butter knife. The room went quiet. "Tonight," she said, "I want to talk about legacy." She started with Tate, my brother. 35, still calling himself an entrepreneur, despite never finishing a single project past the logo stage. Cordelia placed her hand on his shoulder and announced that the lake house on Watauga, 4 bedrooms, 2 acres, the dock my grandfather built, would go to him. Tate nodded, like he had earned it. Then she moved to my cousins. Mitchell got the shares in the hardware store. Davis got the farmland off Route 19, 46 acres my grandfather had cleared by hand. I stood near the dessert table holding a glass of sweet tea, and I waited for my name the way you wait for a bus you already know isn't coming. You stand there anyway, because leaving would mean admitting you were never on the route. She never said my name. Not once. When she finished, people clapped. Somebody whistled. I set my glass down on the edge of Mrs. Drummond's lemon cake platter and walked to the center of the room. My shoes were quiet on the carpet. Flats. I always wear flats when I fly habit from work, and I had come straight from a 12-hour shift. "And me," I said, not loud, not angry, just clear enough for the first 3 rows to hear, which meant clear enough for everyone. Cordelia turned. She looked at me the way she always looked at me, like she was trying to remember which room I belonged in. "Listen carefully, child," she said. "Your mother's share died with her. 80 people. Not one of them moved. I felt Mrs. Drummond's hand twitch near my elbow, reaching, but not quite touching. The chandelier above us had 9 bulbs. One was flickering. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, put it over my arm, and walked out the front door. I did not slam it. I did not cry. I did not explain. Before I continue, please like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you. Drop your location and local time in the comments so I know where you are listening from. My name is Sable, and I am 32 years old. I am a flight nurse. I work for LifeBridge Air Medical out of a base in the Appalachian Highlands, and I fly in a helicopter to pull people out of the worst moments of their lives. Car wrecks on mountain roads, heart attacks in towns with no hospital, strokes in kitchens, where the nearest ambulance is 43 minutes away. I have done this for 6 years, 14 shifts a month, and I am very good at it. My crew chief says I have the calmest hands he has ever seen. I once held a man's femoral artery closed for 9 minutes in the back of a helicopter pitching through a thunderstorm. My heart rate was 84. My family does not know any of this. To them, I am the quiet one, the one who does something with ambulances, the one who was not worth mentioning at a table set for 80. But Cordelia made a mistake that night. Not the speech. The speech was just the latest in a long line. The mistake was the word she chose. Listen. That word has lived in my bones since I was 12 years old. Since the afternoon, my mother pressed a stethoscope into my hands and leaned down until her breath was warm against my ear. Listen carefully, she said, not just to heartbeats, to everything people are afraid to say out loud. Her name was Lenora. She died 2 years later. I was 14. They told me it was a car accident, a patch of ice, a guardrail. Bad timing. I believed that story for 18 years. I carried it like a stone in my pocket, smooth from all the times I turned it over in my fingers trying to make it feel lighter. It never did. Let me take you back. 18 years to the kitchen table in Cordelia Hargrove's house, where I first learned that some people count and some people do not, and that the people who decide which is which are not always the people who should. But what I did not know then, what no one told me until 3 weeks after that ceremony, was that my mother had seen all of it coming, every last piece, and she had left me something far more powerful than a seat at Cordelia's table. Cordelia Hargrove's kitchen table was made of walnut, 8 feet long, 6 chairs, on each side, one at each head. My grandfather Edgar built it the year he married her, 1966, and every scratch on that surface had a name. The burn mark near the 3rd chair was from Thanksgiving 1994, when Uncle Dale set a casserole dish down without a trivet. The gouge by the salt shaker was from Tate dragging a toy truck across the wood when he was 4. Cordelia never sanded it out. She liked pointing at it. That is what happens, she would say, when no one teaches a boy discipline. She always looked at my mother when she said it. I grew up at that table, every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every birthday that mattered, and several that did not. My seat was the second from the end on the left side between Tate and the wall. Tate got the chair next to Cordelia. I got the one next to the kitchen door, which meant I was the one who got up to refill the water pitcher, clear the plates, and bring the dessert. I did not realize until I was much older that no one had ever asked me to do this. I just did it because no one else moved, and the silence of no one moving felt heavier than the plates. There were 2 sets of rules in that house. I understood this the way children understand gravity, not because anyone explained it, but because I fell enough times to learn where the edges were. Tate's rules. Tate could fail a class, and Cordelia would call the teacher. Tate could wreck the truck my grandfather left him, and Cordelia would buy another. Tate could drop out of community college, try a landscaping business that lasted 4 months, try a vending machine route that lasted 6 weeks, try a cryptocurrency podcast that lasted exactly 1 episode, and every single time, Cordelia would write a check and say, "He just hasn't found his lane yet." My rules. I brought home a 91 in biology, and Cordelia asked why it was not a 95. I asked for $40 for a school field trip, and Cordelia said, "What has your mother been spending her money on?" I told her I wanted to be a nurse, and she set her fork down, looked at my father and said, "Nurses empty bedpans, Warren. Is that what Lenora is teaching her?" My father said nothing. He almost never said anything at that table. Warren Hargrove was a carpenter, not the kind who builds houses, but the kind who restores old furniture chairs with broken spindles, dressers with warped drawers. He worked in the garage behind Cordelia's house, and he was good at it in the quiet way that people are good at things nobody notices. His hands were wide and cracked at the knuckles. Sawdust lived in the creases of his neck. He smelled like linseed oil and coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. He loved my mother. I know this because of the way he turned his head when someone said her name, not toward the voice, but away from it, like the sound hit something inside him that was still too raw to face. But love and strength are not the same thing, and my father had one without the other. He had married Lenora against Cordelia's wishes. That was the bravest thing he ever did, and I think it used up everything he had. After my mother died, he stopped going to the garage for 3 months. When he came back, he only worked on other people's furniture, never ours. I once asked him to fix the leg on my desk, the one that wobbled so badly I had to put a folded napkin under it to do homework. He said, "I will get to it." He never did. That desk still wobbles. I know because it is still in the room I grew up in, at Cordelia's house. And the napkin is still there, a paper towel folded into quarters dated by the grease stain from a pepperoni slice I was eating the night before my 14th birthday. The night before my mother died. But I did not know that then. What I knew then was that there was one person in my life who saw me clearly, and she did not live in that house. Dee Francine, my mother's younger sister. She lived 40 minutes east in a rented cottage behind a Baptist church where she gave piano lessons to children who mostly did not want to learn piano. Cordelia called her that woman who couldn't keep a husband. Francine had been married once for 2 years to a man who sold insurance and left her for a dental hygienist in Roanoke. She never married again. She had a cat named Dorsey, a garden full of rosemary, and a way of listening that made you feel like the most important person in any room. Every Sunday night at 7:15, my phone would ring. Francine. 7 minutes exactly. She said she did not want to run up the bill, but I think she timed it because structure was how she showed love. She would ask me 3 questions: what I ate that week, what I read that week, and what made me laugh that week. If I could not answer the third one, she would tell me a story about my mother until I could. "Your mother used to put hot sauce on her cereal," she told me once, "not because she liked it, because your grandmother told her it was unladylike, and Lenora wanted to see how long it would take Cordelia to stop watching." How long, I asked. 6 years, Francine said. Cordelia never stopped watching, but your mother never stopped either. One Sunday when I was 16, I asked Francine if my mother had left me anything. A letter, a necklace, anything. Francine was quiet for 5 seconds. I counted. "When you are ready," she said, "I have something for you, but not yet. You will know when." I did not understand what she meant. I would not understand for another 16 years until the night I sat in my car outside First Methodist with my grandmother's words ringing in my skull and my mother's stethoscope in my hands. If you have ever been the person who fills the water pitcher while everyone else sits and eats, stay with me. Because what happened next, even I did not see coming. I applied to nursing school the summer I turned 17. I filled out the application at the kitchen table in Cordelia's house, the walnut one, my usual seat second from the end while everyone else was at Tate's baseball banquet. I was not invited, not officially. Cordelia had said, "It is really just for the players and their families." And when I reminded her that I was Tate's family, she tilted her head and said, "You know what I mean, sweetheart." I did know what she meant. That was the worst part. The application asked for an emergency contact. I wrote Francine's name. It asked for a personal statement. I wrote 412 words about the night. A boy in my ninth grade class collapsed during a fire drill, and I held his head off the asphalt until the paramedics arrived. His name was Clay Boggs. He had epilepsy. The seizure lasted 90 seconds, and in those 90 seconds I learned something about myself that I could not unlearn. I do not panic. My hands go still. My breathing slows. The louder everything gets, the quieter I become. I did not tell anyone in my family that I had applied. Not Warren, not Tate, not Cordelia. I told Francine on our Sunday call, and she said, "Your mother would be playing that hot sauce cereal game right now if she could see you." The acceptance letter came in March. I opened it in the driveway, sitting on the front steps because no one was home. Cordelia was at her ladies' Bible study. Warren was in the garage, but the garage might as well have been another zip code. Tate was in Knoxville doing something he called market research, which, as far as I could tell, meant eating wings at a Hooters and calling it networking. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it back into the envelope, walked upstairs, and put it in the bottom drawer of my wobbling desk, next to the pepperoni-stained napkin and a photograph of my mother holding me at the county fair when I was 3. In the photo, she is laughing so hard her eyes are closed. I am holding a stick of cotton candy that is almost bigger than my head. I do not remember that day. I only remember the photograph. Orientation was a Tuesday in August. I drove myself. 46 miles on Route 11, windows down, the stethoscope on the passenger seat in its original box. I had not worn it yet. It still felt like hers, not mine. The "Listen carefully" engraving caught the sunlight every time I passed a gap in the tree line, and for a moment it looked like the letters were blinking at me. No one from my family came. No one asked when it was. The only message I received that day was from Francine, a text because it was a Tuesday and our calls were Sundays. It said, "First day, first step, she is watching." I want to be precise about what nursing school was like because people imagine scrubs and flashcards, and that is only half of it. The other half is learning to read a body, the way a mechanic reads an engine, by sound, by rhythm, by the things that are slightly off. I was good at pharmacology and better at trauma assessment. My clinical instructor, a woman named Mrs. Atherton, who had been an Army nurse in 2 wars, told me during my 3rd semester that I had battlefield hands. I asked her what that meant. She said, "You do not flinch. Most students flinch." I graduated in the top 4 of my class. Francine sent flowers, yellow roses, my mother's favorite, though I did not learn that detail until years later. A card. "She is still watching." No one else sent anything. Cordelia found out I had graduated only because a neighbor, Mrs. Drummond, mentioned it at church. Cordelia's response, relayed to me through Tate on a rare phone call, was, "Well, I hope she finds something steady." I was already employed. LifeBridge Air Medical had recruited me straight out of my ER residency rotation. They needed flight nurses, the kind who could start a central line in a helicopter at 8,000 feet while the pilot banked through cloud cover. The kind who could look at a crushed car on a mountain road and decide in 11 seconds who to stabilize first. The base was in the Highlands, 90 minutes from Cordelia's house, close enough to visit and far enough to breathe. I did not visit. If you have ever done something extraordinary and had no one to tell, hit subscribe, because I spent the next 4 years building a life that nobody in my family knew existed. My first flight was a Thursday in October. Rain so heavy the windshield wipers on the ambulance below us looked like they were drowning. The patient was a 17-year-old who had flipped his truck on a switchback near Boone. Broken femur, punctured lung, blood pressure dropping like a clock running out of battery. I climbed into the back of that helicopter, clipped in, and pulled the stethoscope out of my flight bag. My mother's stethoscope. I put it around my neck for the first time, and the metal was cold against my collarbone, and for 3 seconds I was 12 years old again, standing in the kitchen while Lenora leaned down and whispered the only 2 words I have ever needed. The boy lived. His mother sent me a card that said, "You gave me my son back." I kept it in my locker at base for 3 years until the tape wore out and it fell behind the shelf. I never retrieved it. Some things you do not need to hold to remember. And Francine every Sunday, 7:15, 7 minutes. She never missed. But one Sunday, when I was 28 and had been flying for 2 years, she said something different at the end of the call. "Your mother left you more than a stethoscope sable." I waited for her to explain. She did not. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Not yet," she said, "but soon." She hung up at 7:22, 7 minutes exactly. By the time I was 31, I had flown 219 missions. I kept a logbook, not because LifeBridge required it, but because counting is how I process the world. 219 flights, 183 patients transported, 31 pronounced on scene before we could lift, 5 flights where the weather turned so bad we had to land in a field and wait. I remember every field. The one near Marion smelled like hay and diesel. The one outside Spruce Pine had a fence post with a boot nailed to the top, and I never found out why. My apartment was a 1-bedroom above a hardware store in a town so small, the post office shared a wall with the laundromat. The rent was $630 a month. I had a couch from a thrift store, a kitchen table I had bought at a garage sale for $20, and a cat named Bishop who had shown up on my fire escape during a snowstorm and refused to leave. Bishop was gray, missing half his left ear, and had the personality of someone who had seen too much and decided the appropriate response was napping. I loved him immediately. My kitchen table was nothing like Cordelia's. It was small, round-scratched, and seated too. But it was mine, and no one had assigned the chairs. I was nominated for the National EMS Award that spring. My crew chief, a man named Darren Oakes, who had been flying medevac since before I was born, had submitted the paperwork without telling me. He called me into his office on a Wednesday, I remember, because Wednesdays were my short days, only one standby shift, and handed me the letter. "You earned this," he said. "Don't make that face." "What face?" "The one where you look like someone just told you there's been a mistake." I did not tell my family. I did not tell anyone except Francine, who cried on the phone for 45 seconds and then said, "I need to go blow my nose. Call me back in 2 minutes." I called her back in 2 minutes. She was still crying. The award ceremony was in Richmond. I drove 3 hours, wore a blazer I had bought at a consignment shop for $28, and sat at a table with 6 other nominees. The keynote speaker was a retired paramedic who had worked the Oklahoma City bombing. He talked about the sound, not the explosion, but the silence after. When the dust was still falling, and the first responders stood at the edge of the crater, trying to decide where to start. "You do not rise to the occasion," he said. "You fall to the level of your training." I wrote that sentence on a napkin and kept it in my wallet for 2 years. I did not win the award. A flight paramedic from Anchorage won it, a woman named Gail something who had landed a helicopter after the pilot passed out at the controls. Fair enough. But the nomination alone was more recognition than my family had given me in 31 years combined, and that thought sat in my chest like a second heartbeat for the entire drive home. It was during that drive, 3 hours, on I-64, the mountains turning purple in the last hour of daylight, that I thought about what I had become. I earned $127,000 a year. I had 219 missions in my logbook. I had a crew that trusted me with their lives and patients who sent me letters I kept in a shoebox under my bed. And not one person in my family knew any of it. Not the flights, not the salary, not the nomination, not Bishop, not the apartment above the hardware store. To Cordelia, I was still the girl who emptied bedpans. To Warren, I was a voice on the phone twice a year, Christmas and his birthday 4 minutes each, the conversations so shallow they evaporated before I hung up. To Tate, I was nothing at all. I had made myself invisible. Not because they forced me. They had started it, yes, but I had finished the job. I had gotten so used to not being seen that I forgot I was allowed to stand in the light. That realization hit me somewhere around mile marker 112, and I pulled over onto the shoulder and sat there with the engine running and my hands on the wheel. A truck passed, and the car rocked. Bishop was at home waiting for his dinner. The mountains did not care. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and cried for the first time in 3 years, and I do not know if I was crying for my mother or for the girl who had spent 18 years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never going to have her name on it. 7 minutes. That is how long I sat there. I did not time it on purpose, but when I looked at the clock, it had been 7 minutes, and I almost laughed because of course it was 7. 7 minutes was Francine. 7 minutes was the only person who had ever consistently shown up. I wiped my face with a napkin from the glove compartment, put the car in drive, and went home. 3 weeks later, the invitation arrived. Cream-colored envelope. Cordelia's handwriting. The tall, slanted cursive she had learned at a finishing school in 1968 and never let anyone forget. Inside a card with gold edging. You are cordially invited to celebrate the Hargrove family legacy. Dinner and remarks. Saturday the 14th, 6 o'clock sharp. I had not heard from Cordelia in 2 years. Not a call, not a card, not a forwarded prayer chain email. 2 years of nothing, and now this gold edging and 6 o'clock sharp. I called Francine that Sunday at 7:15. I got an invitation, I said. She was quiet. 5 seconds, I counted. Go, she said, but keep your eyes open. Why? Because your grandmother does not send invitations, Sable. She sends summons. I did not ask what she meant. I think I already knew. But I went anyway because the 14-year-old girl inside me, who had lost her mother and spent 18 years at the wrong end of a walnut table, still wanted, despite everything, to be called by name. What I did not expect was that the name Cordelia would refuse to say was the one that would change everything. I drove to Cordelia's house on a Saturday in October, 46 minutes from my apartment, the same Route 11. I had taken to nursing school orientation 9 years earlier. The stethoscope was not in the car this time. It was hanging on a hook by my front door next to my flight jacket and the leash I had bought for Bishop before I realized he was not the kind of cat who went outside voluntarily. The fellowship hall at First Methodist was lit up like a department store. Cars lined both sides of the road, Buick Chevys, one. Lincoln town car that belonged to Cordelia's lawyer, a man named Hale who had handled the Hargrove accounts for 20 years and had a handshake that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. I recognized most of the plates. Local. A few from the next county. One from as far as Asheville, which meant Cousin Mitchell had driven 4 hours for whatever this was. 80 people. I counted them as I walked in. Not because I wanted to, but because my brain does this. It inventories a room the way it inventories a helicopter before takeoff. Exits, obstacles, faces. 11 tables of 6, plus the head table where Cordelia sat flanked by Tate on her left and Uncle Dale on her right. 2 empty chairs at the head table. One had a reserved card on it. The other did not. I took a seat at table 9 near the back, between Mrs. Drummond and a man I did not recognize who turned out to be the new deacon. Cordelia was wearing a navy dress with pearl buttons. Her hair was set in the same style she had worn since 1987, curled under at the shoulders, not a strand loose. She held a glass of white wine in her left hand and a folded piece of paper in her right. The paper was her speech. I know this because she unfolded it exactly the way she unfolds everything slowly, as if the act of opening it was itself a performance. She talked for 11 minutes. I timed it on my watch, the plain Timex I wear on shift, because anything nicer gets ruined by blood and antiseptic. She talked about Edgar, my grandfather, dead 9 years. She talked about the family name. She talked about legacy and responsibility and the ones who carry us forward. Then she started the distribution. Tate the Lake House on Watauga. 4 bedrooms, the dock, 2 acres of waterfront. Tate put his hand over his heart like he was accepting an Oscar. Mitchell shares in the hardware store Edgar had co-founded in 1971. Enough to live on if you did not live expensively, which Mitchell did not. Davis, the farmland off Route 19. 46 acres. I had played in those fields as a child, caught fireflies in mason jars, while my mother sat on the fence and watched. Each name landed in the room like a small, clean stone dropped into water. Tate. Mitchell. Davis. Not Sable. I waded through the applause. I waded through Cordelia's closing remarks about gratitude and God's provision and the importance of keeping land in the family. I waded through the moment when Uncle Dale raised his glass and said, "To Cordelia, the backbone of this family," and 80 people clinked their glasses and drank. Then I stood up. Mrs. Drummond's hand brushed my wrist, not grabbing, just touching the way you touch someone when you know what is about to happen and you wish you could stop it. "And me," I said. The room contracted. I felt it 80 people pulling their breath in at the same time the way a wave pulls back before it hits the shore. Cordelia turned from the head table. Her glass was still raised. "Listen carefully, child," she said. Her voice was patient, almost kind. That was the worst part. She said it like she was teaching me something I should have already known. Your mother's share died with her. If you have ever stood in a room full of people and felt every single one of them decide you do not exist, drop the word truth in the comments. Because that is what it felt like. Not anger, not humiliation, but erasure. Like someone had taken a pencil and drawn a line through my name so carefully that even the paper did not wrinkle. I picked up my jacket. I walked between tables 4 and 5, past the dessert station where Mrs. Drummond's lemon cake sat untouched, past the portrait of Reverend Caldwell, past the oak panels that smelled like furniture polish and old hymnals. I pushed the front door open with my left hand. I did not look back. In the parking lot, the air was 41 degrees. I know because my car's dashboard said so. I sat behind the wheel with the engine off and my hands on my knees, and the stethoscope no. The stethoscope was at home, but I reached for my neck anyway, the way you reach for something that has always been there, and when my fingers touched bare skin, I understood something I had been circling for 18 years. Listen carefully. My mother had said it with love. Cordelia had said it with a blade. The same 2 words, and they had carved completely different wounds. I sat there for 12 minutes. Then I called Francine. She picked up on the second ring. It was not Sunday, and it was not 7:15, but she answered as if she had been waiting by the phone, and maybe she had. "She did it," I said. "I know. You knew she would." Francine exhaled, not a sigh, something heavier. "Sable, it is time." "Time for what?" "Come to the house tomorrow, 11 o'clock. There is a box I have been keeping for you. Your mother packed it when you were 11 years old. I have been waiting for you to ask the right question, and you just did." "What question?" "The one you asked in that room tonight. You asked where you belong. Your mother answered it 21 years ago. You just were not ready to hear it." I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone. Just the engine and the road and the 46 minutes of mountain dark between Cordelia's world and mine. Bishop was sitting on the kitchen table when I walked in. He looked at me the way cats look at people who come home late, not with judgment exactly, but with a detailed awareness that dinner was overdue. I fed him. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, and I held my mother's stethoscope in both hands, and I turned those 2 words over and over in my head like stones in a tumbler. Listen carefully. Somebody was about to. Francine's cottage sat behind the Baptist church on Elm Creek Road, a white clapboard house with green shutters and a porch swing that creaked in a rhythm so consistent you could set a metronome to it. I had been coming here since I was 14 after my mother died. This was the only place that still smelled like her. Rosemary from the garden lemon dish soap and something faint underneath that I could never name, but that Francine said was just old wood being honest. I arrived at 11. Francine was already on the porch wearing a cardigan the color of rust and holding a mug of tea. She had no intention of drinking. Dorsey, her cat Orange, 17 years old, mostly deaf, was asleep on the welcome mat. Francine looked at me the way she always looked at me, like I was the answer to a question she had been carrying for a very long time. "Sit down," she said. I sat in the porch swing. She went inside and came back with a box. It was not large, the size of a shoebox, maybe slightly deeper. Brown cardboard, the corners soft with age. My mother's handwriting on the top in blue ink, slightly faded. "For Sable, when she is ready." I stared at those 5 words for a long time. Francine sat in the chair across from me and said nothing. She understood that some silences are not empty, they are full of every word you have been waiting to hear. I opened the box. Inside 3 things, each one wrapped in tissue paper, so carefully that the folds were still sharp after 21 years, which meant my mother had pressed them with an iron. Lenora ironed everything: shirts, napkins, pillowcases. Cordelia called it compulsive. Francine called it intentional. I called it love because I was old enough now to know the difference. The first item was a life insurance policy, Hartford Life Policy, number HLT4407, issued March 3, 2009. Policy holder, Lenora Kane Hargrove, Death benefit, $680,000. Sole beneficiary, Sable Hargrove minor, with custodial account held by Francine Kane until beneficiary reaches age of majority. I read it 3 times. The numbers did not change. She bought this when you were 11, Francine said. She did not tell Warren. She did not tell Cordelia. She came to my kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon and signed every page, and then she went home and made dinner like nothing had happened. Why? I said. Because she knew, Francine said. She knew that if something happened to her, Cordelia would close ranks. She knew Warren would not fight. And she knew you would be the one left standing outside the door. The second item was a custodial account statement. The account had been opened the same day as the policy, March 3rd, 2009. Initial deposit, the death benefit, $680,000 transferred upon Lenora's death in 2011. 18 years of compound interest at an average rate of 2.4%. Current balance as of last quarter's statement, $1,041,216. $1 million. My mother, who Cordelia said never contributed anything to this family, had left me $1 million and no one knew. Not Warren, not Tate, not Cordelia. Only Francine, who had been sitting on this secret for 18 years, the way a bird sits on an egg patient, warm and terrified of cracking it too soon. There is one more thing, Francine said. The third item was a manila envelope. Inside it, a medical file photocopied 14 pages stapled. In the top left corner, County General Hospital, dated November 14, 2011. Patient Lenora Kane Hargrove. Admission time, 9:47 p.m. If you have ever been lied to by the people who were supposed to protect you, stay with me. Because what I read in those 14 pages rewrote every single thing I thought I knew about the night my mother died. The admitting physician's notes were on page 3. I have read thousands of medical files in my career intake forms, trauma assessments, transfer summaries. I read them the way most people read grocery lists, quickly and without emotion. But this one I read the way you read a letter from someone who is no longer alive. Every word had weight. Patient arrived via private vehicle at approximately 9:47 p.m., presented with acute abdominal distress, diaphoresis, and altered consciousness. Family reported initial decision to monitor patient at home. Estimated time from onset of symptoms to arrival at emergency department approximately 2 hours. 2 hours. My mother had been in pain for 2 hours before anyone drove her to the hospital. 2 hours of someone deciding she was not sick enough, not serious enough, not worth the cost of an ambulance. I knew what 2 hours meant. I flew helicopters for a living because 2 hours is the difference between a patient who walks out of the ICU and a patient who does not walk out at all. In my world, 2 hours is not a delay. It is a verdict. I turned to page 6, the ER physician's summary. Upon further inquiry, patient's mother-in-law present at intake stated, "She was complaining earlier, but she does this. She is dramatic. We thought she would settle down by morning." Cordelia. Those were Cordelia's words transcribed by a nurse at 9:53 p.m. on a Tuesday night in November, while my mother was dying 14 feet away behind a curtain in Bay 4. She is dramatic. I closed the file. I set it on the porch swing beside me. Francine had not moved. She was watching me with eyes that had carried this knowledge for 18 years and had never once let it slip. "There is a letter," Francine said, "in the envelope, underneath the file." I reached in. A single sheet of paper folded twice. My mother's handwriting the same blue ink as the box, but smaller, tighter, as if she had been writing quickly or quietly or both. The first line, "If you are reading this, someone finally listened." I could not read the rest. Not then. My hands were shaking, not the fine tremor of adrenaline that I manage every shift, but something deeper, something that started in my ribs and worked outward until even my jaw was tight. I folded the letter back into its creases and held it against my chest. I sat on Francine's porch for 22 minutes. I know because the church bell across the road rang once at 11:30, and I was still sitting there when it rang again at noon. Minus the 8 minutes, it took me to walk to the garden and back because I needed to move or I was going to break something. When I came back, I looked at Francine. "I need a lawyer," I said. Francine did not blink. "His name is Keegan Marsh. I hired him 3 years ago." 3 years. I told you, Sable. Your mother saw all of it coming. I just helped her stay ahead. Keegan Marsh had an office above a print shop in Abingdon, 40 minutes north of Francine's cottage. The door at the top of the stairs had a brass nameplate that read Marsh and Associates, though as far as I could tell, the associates were a paralegal named Donna and a coffee maker that sounded like it was grieving. I was younger than I expected. Mid-40s, wire-rimmed glasses, a tie that was slightly too short. He stood when I walked in, shook my hand, and said, "Francine told me you would come. I just did not know when." 3 years, I said. She hired you 3 years ago. She did. He sat down and opened a green folder. Your aunt brought me the custodial account documents, the insurance policy, and the hospital records in 2023. I have been building the file since then. Building it for what? He looked at me over his glasses. For the day you needed it. This is the part of the story where people expect me to say I was angry, that I wanted revenge, that I sat in Keegan Marsh's office and planned some elaborate takedown. But that is not what happened. What happened was much quieter and much more like me. Keegan explained the situation the way I explain a patient's condition to their family, clear, direct, without unnecessary softening. The custodial account was legally mine, had been since the death benefit was paid. Cordelia had no claim, no knowledge, and no standing to challenge it. The money was mine. It had always been mine. What about the medical records? I asked. The statute of limitations for wrongful death in this state is 2 years. That window closed in 2013. No criminal exposure, no civil claim. I know, I said. I am not looking for a lawsuit. He set his pen down. Then what are you looking for? I thought about that question for 11 seconds. 11 seconds does not sound long unless you are sitting across from a lawyer who charges $275 an hour and the clock on his wall ticks louder than any clock has a right to. I want them to know, I said, not because I want to punish them, because I am tired of carrying what they did in the dark. I want it in the light, and I want it said by the documents, not by me. Keegan nodded slowly. Then here is what I suggest. We spent 2 hours in that office. Keegan organized the file into 3 folders. Folder 1, the life insurance policy and custodial account statement proof that Lenora had prepared for exactly what Cordelia did. Folder 2, the hospital records, the 2-hour delay, Cordelia's statement, the admitting physician's notes. Folder 3, Lenora's letter. I had read the letter in full by then. Alone in my apartment at 2 a.m, with Bishop on my lap, and every light in the kitchen turned on. My mother wrote the way she spoke, direct, warm, and without waste. She did not accuse anyone. She did not predict her own death. What she did was simpler and more devastating. She described the family she had married into with the precision of someone who had spent years watching from inside a machine she could not stop. Cordelia decides who matters, my mother wrote. She decided before I married Warren, and she will decide after I am gone. I cannot change her. But I can make sure you are standing on solid ground when she tries to move the earth beneath you. That sentence. I read it 9 times. My mother had built me a floor, and she had done it so quietly that the woman who controlled every surface in that family never heard a single nail go in. If you think a mother's love stops working after she dies, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because Lenora had been protecting me from a kitchen table she would never sit at again, and she had been doing it for 21 years. 3 weeks passed. I worked my shifts. I flew 11 missions. I fed Bishop. I did not call Warren. I did not call Tate. I went to Francine's cottage twice, and we sat on the porch and drank tea and did not talk about the box because Francine understood that preparation is not the same as readiness, and I was not ready yet. Then Cordelia called. It was a Thursday. I was in the break room at base eating a turkey sandwich and reading a transfer report. My phone buzzed. The screen said, Cordelia Hargrove, and I stared at it for 3 rings, because there are some voices you have to brace for the way you brace for turbulence. Sable, she said. Her voice was warm. Cordelia only used warmth when she needed something. I have been thinking about the ceremony. I feel we left things unfinished. Unfinished, I repeated. I would like you to come to dinner. Saturday. Just family. I think it is time we all sat down and talked about your place in this family. My place. She said it like a seat assignment. I will be there, I said. Wonderful, 6 o'clock, and Sable come with an open mind. I hung up and called Keegan. She invited me to dinner, I said. Saturday. Is she going to ask you to sign something? Probably. Bring me with you. I almost smiled. She said just family. Then I will wait in the car until you are ready. But Sable, bring the folders, all three, and do not sign anything until I am in the room. I spent the next 2 days, the way I spend the hours before a difficult flight, checking equipment, running scenarios, making sure every variable I can control is controlled. I ironed a blouse. I chose flat shoes. I put Lenora's letter in my jacket pocket close to my ribs, where I could feel the fold of the paper against my skin like a second pulse. Saturday came the way all Saturdays come, when you are waiting for one slowly and then all at once. Cordelia's house smelled like roast beef and lavender candles. The walnut table had been set for 14 gold-rimmed china cloth napkins, folded into triangles, a centerpiece of white roses that looked like it had been assembled by someone who watched one tutorial and decided that was enough. I arrived at 5:58, 14 chairs, Cordelia at the head, Tate to her left with his girlfriend Jess, Uncle Dale and Carol, Mitchell and Davis, Warren at the far end, a glass of water instead of wine, Mrs. Drummond and Mr. Pitkin neighbors. Cordelia always salted her dinners with because she considered them loyal witnesses. And at my place second from the end, between Tate and the wall, a single sheet of paper face down. I sat, I did not touch it. Dinner passed the way. Dinners pass in that house along routes Cordelia had approved. Tate talked about cold-pressed juice. Mitchell talked about the hardware store. Warren said nothing. He cut his beef into small squares and ate them one at a time, the way a man eats when his jaw is clenched. After dessert, Cordelia stood. Before we clear the table, there is a small matter of family business. She looked at me. Sable, honey, we all want you to feel included. This simply formalizes what we all already understand. Just a signature, sweetheart, so we can all move forward as a family. I picked up the paper. I read it. 47 seconds. A general release, a waiver of any future claim to the Hargrove estate, including real property, financial accounts, and any and all instruments of inheritance or testamentary disposition. 2 signature lines, mine and Cordelia's. I set it down. I brought someone, I said. Cordelia's smile did not move, but her eyes did. This is a family dinner, Sable. He will only be a minute. I sent one text the word now, and 30 seconds later, Keegan Marsh walked into the dining room, wearing a gray suit and carrying a briefcase. Good evening. My name is Keegan Marsh. I am Ms. Hargrove's attorney. Hale straightened. Lawyers know lawyers, the way pilots know pilots, by the way they enter a room already knowing where the exits are. This is unnecessary, Cordelia said. With respect, Mrs. Hargrove, the document on the table is a legal instrument. My client has the right to counsel. I am sure Mr. Hale would agree. Hale said nothing. Keegan opened his briefcase. 3 folders on the walnut table spaced evenly, each one exactly where it needed to be. Folder 1, Hartford Life Insurance Policy Number HLT4407, issued March 3, 2009. Policyholder Lenora Kane Hargrove. Death benefit $680,000. Sole beneficiary Sable Hargrove. He placed the custodial account statement beside it. Current balance, including 18 years of accumulated interest, $1,041,216. That is impossible, Cordelia said. Lenora did not have that kind of money. The records are certified, Mrs. Hargrove. Tate leaned forward. Mom, did you know about this? Cordelia did not answer. If you have ever watched a room full of people realize that the person they dismissed was the one who was prepared, stay with me. Because Keegan was not finished. Folder 2, the medical records. He read the admitting physician's notes, the 2-hour delay, the family's decision to monitor at home. Then, in a voice so level it could have been reading a weather forecast, patient's mother-in-law present at intake stated, "She was complaining earlier, but she does this. She is dramatic. We thought she would settle down by morning." Mrs. Drummond put her hand over her mouth. Mr. Pitkin set his fork down with a sound like a small bone breaking. Warren stood. His chair scraped the floor. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room. His shoulders were shaking. In the glass I could see his reflection. His eyes were closed. "Mom." Tate's voice was different, younger. "You told me it was a car accident for 18 years. She was fine, Cordelia said. The performance was gone. She said she was fine. She was not fine, I said. My voice was the voice I use at 3 a.m. when a patient is coding and the only thing standing between them and the dark is my hands. She was dying. and you decided it was not worth a phone call. Folder 3. My mother's letter. I did not read it aloud. That letter was mine, but I placed it on the table and said, "This is a letter my mother wrote before she died. I am not going to share what it says, but I want everyone to know it exists. She saw this coming, all of it, and she prepared for it alone." Hale closed his notepad, capped his pen, pushed his chair back. "I need to step outside," he said. I did not come back. Tate turned to Cordelia. "What else did you lie about?" "Everything I did was for this family," Cordelia said. "Which family?" Tate said, because it was not hers. Mitchell asked Dale if he knew. Dale said he did not. Carol said she always thought something was off. Jess looked at Tate like she was recalculating something she had previously considered settled. The table that Edgar Hargrove had built with his hands was shaking because 14 people were leaning on it and none of them were leaning in the same direction. I did not move. I did not need to say another word. The documents had said everything. But I said one thing. I looked at Cordelia, who was gripping the table edge with both hands, her pearl buttons catching the candlelight, her eyes wet for the first time in 32 years. "You told me to listen carefully," I said. I did, for 18 years. I picked up my mother's letter. I put it in my jacket pocket against my ribs. I stood. I pushed my chair in. And I walked out of Cordelia Hargrove's house for the last time through the same kitchen door I had spent 20 years going through to refill the water pitcher. This time I was not carrying anything for anyone but myself. 3 weeks passed. 21 days. Roughly the same amount of time it takes for a bruise to fade from purple to yellow to nothing. In those 3 weeks, the Hargrove family fell, and they fell in different directions, and not one of them reached for the same handhold. Cordelia stopped going to church. Mrs. Drummond called me to report this the first time she had ever called me directly. "Your grandmother has not been to First Methodist in 2 Sundays, she said. "The Hendersons stopped coming to her Tuesday luncheon. Betty Colvard, too. People talk sable." I did not ask what they were saying. In a town where Cordelia had spent 40 years as the matriarch who held everything together, the revelation that she had let her daughter-in-law suffer for 2 hours and lied about it for 18 was not gossip. It was a reclassification. Tate called me once, a Tuesday afternoon. I was restocking the drug kit in the helicopter fentanyl midazolam, the small glass vials that clink against each other like wind chimes when the rotors spin up. "Sable," he said. His voice sounded like wet cardboard, soft in the wrong places, structurally unsound. "Tate." 6 seconds of silence, I counted. "I did not know," he said. "About Mom, about Lenora. I swear I did not know." I believed him. Tate was many things, unfocused, entitled, careless, but he was not cruel. He was the golden child because Cordelia had built the pedestal, not because he had climbed it himself. "What do you want me to say?" I asked. "I do not know. I just needed you to know that I did not know." "Okay, I hear you. I am not going to tell you it is fine because it is not fine, but I hear you." He hung up without saying goodbye. I went back to the drug kit. The fentanyl vials were cold in my hand. Warren did not call. Warren texted. 5 words on a Wednesday at 6:14 in the morning. I should have called. Not, "I am sorry." Not, "Can we talk?" Just the blunt carpenter's admission of a man who had measured the gap and found it exact. He should have called 911. He should have called me. He should have called the truth by its name instead of letting Cordelia rename it as a car accident. I did not reply. If someone in your family has ever sent you a message that said everything and nothing at the same time, share this with them. Not as a punishment, as a mirror. Francine told me what happened next. Warren had driven to Lenora's grave, the small plot in Mountain View Cemetery. The flat stone that read, "Beloved Mother," because Cordelia had refused to pay for the word wife. He stood there for 40 minutes. The groundskeeper, Cal, called Francine. "Warren Hargrove is standing at your sister's grave long enough that I am wondering if I should bring him a chair." 40 minutes. My father, who had not visited that grave in 18 years, stood in November wind for 40 minutes and said nothing. Or maybe he said everything. I was not there, and some conversations are not mine to witness, even when they are about the person I miss most. I gave it 1 more week. I worked 4 shifts. I flew 6 missions. I read my mother's letter 3 more times in bed in the bath, once on the kitchen floor at midnight, because that floor had become my place of reckoning. Then I sat at my kitchen table, the small round one, the garage sale one, the one with no assigned chairs, and I wrote an email. To Warren Hargrove, Tate Hargrove, Cordelia Hargrove. Subject conditions. I am not closing the door, but I am the one who decides when it opens, how wide, and who walks through. Dad, write a letter. Not to me, to Mom. Everything you should have said, everything you should have done, every phone call you did not make. Read it out loud at her grave. I do not need to be there, but it needs to happen. Tate, call me directly, not through Cordelia, not through a cousin or a girlfriend. You dial my number and say what you need to say with your own voice. Cordelia therapy. Not because I am punishing you, because you have been carrying a lie for 18 years, and it has cost you a daughter-in-law, a granddaughter, and the respect of every person who sat at that table. You do not owe me the therapy. You owe it to yourself. I love this family. That is why I stayed as long as I did, and that is why leaving was the hardest thing I have ever done. But love without boundaries is not love. It is just endurance, and I am done enduring. I hit send at 11:47 p.m. Bishop was asleep on the chair across from me. Outside, the first hard frost was settling on the parking lot, and the street light turned the ice into something that looked almost like stars. 6 months later, I moved into a new apartment. 12 minutes from the old one, still in the Highlands. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, with an east-facing window and a walnut table I had chosen myself. Small, round. Seats 4. I know what you are thinking, walnut like Cordelia's. That is exactly why. I was not running from that wood. I was reclaiming it. Bishop adjusted by finding the warmest spot and refusing to move. The radiator by the kitchen window became his. I hung the stethoscope on a hook by the front door next to my jacket and a small clay pot of rosemary Francine had given me. The listen carefully engraving faced outward. Not a shrine, just a fact. Sundays changed. Francine still called at 7:15, but the calls stretched. 14 minutes, 19. By the third month, 22, 3 times the original length. She still asked her 3 questions: what I ate, what I read, what made me laugh. But now she added a 4th. And how is your heart? Getting there, I said. Good. That is enough. A pause. You sound different, you know. Different how? Like someone who stopped holding her breath. I laughed. Not a big laugh, a short one, the kind that escapes before you can catch it. I did not realize I was holding it. 22 years, Francine said. That is a long breath. You counted. Of course I counted. I am your aunt. Counting runs in the family. I cooked. That surprised me. French toast on Sundays. Francine's recipe, which was Lenora's recipe, cinnamon and a pinch of nutmeg, and the trick of letting the bread soak for exactly 90 seconds. I set 2 places every Sunday, one for me, one for whoever might come. No one had come yet, but the plate was there and the chair was pulled out, and that was enough. I did not hear from Cordelia, not once in 6 months. Francine told me gently during minute 17 of a Sunday call that Cordelia had started seeing a therapist in Johnson City. Do you think she means it? I asked. I think she sat in a room with a stranger and did not control the conversation for 50 minutes. Francine said. For Cordelia, that is a revolution. Tate called twice. The first time was 9 minutes of halting sentences and long pauses. He asked about Bishop. He asked about my shifts. How is the cat? He said. His name is Bishop. Right, how is Bishop? Hi is fine. He sleeps on the radiator and judges me. Sounds about right. The second call was shorter, but better. He told me he had gotten a job stocking inventory at a building supply warehouse in Kingsport. $8 above minimum wage and the first W-2 he had filed in 4 years. It is not a startup, he said. It is not a podcast or a juice company or whatever. That is good, Tate. Yeah, a pause. It is. For the first time in 32 years, my brother and I had a conversation that did not require Cordelia's permission. It was a Sunday morning in April when my phone buzzed during French toast. Bishop was on his chair. The coffee was still hot. The cinnamon was still in the air. A text from Warren. No words, just a photograph. His hand wide, cracked at the knuckles, sawdust, still in the creases, resting on Lenora's gravestone. Next to his hand, a small bouquet of yellow roses, my mother's favorite. No caption. I looked at that photograph for a long time. The French toast was cooling. Bishop was watching me with the focused patience of a cat who understands that humans sometimes stop moving for reasons that have nothing to do with food. I did not reply. not because I was angry, but because some things do not need a response. They need a witness. My father had placed his hand on the stone where her name was written. That was a conversation between Warren and Lenora, 18 years overdue, and my role was not to answer it, but to know it had happened. I put the phone down. I ate my French toast while it was still warm, because my mother would have wanted me to, and because there are some mornings when the most revolutionary thing you can do is sit at your own table and not wait for anyone's permission to begin. I washed the dishes. I dried them. I hung the towel on the hook. I put on my jacket, checked my flight bag, and lifted the stethoscope off its nail. The metal was warm. The morning sun had been sitting on it through the window for the last half hour, and it felt less like an instrument and more like a hand. 18 years ago, nobody listened. A woman named Lenora said she was in pain, and the people who were supposed to love her decided she was being dramatic, and she died 14 feet from a curtain in Bay 4 while her mother-in-law filled out intake forms. I became a flight nurse because I did not want anyone else to die in a room full of people who could not be bothered to hear them. I spent 6 years in helicopters and 219 missions, and I held strangers' arteries closed with my bare hands, because the alternative, being the person who does not call, who does not listen, who decides someone else's pain is inconvenient, was not something I was willing to become. But this story is not about revenge. I did not sue anyone. I did not press charges. I did not stand on a stage and tear my family apart with my voice. I let the documents speak because the truth does not need volume. It needs a table and enough light and one person brave enough to stop pretending. Boundaries are not punishment. They are not silence, and they are not cruelty. A boundary is the first honest sentence in a conversation that has been lying for years. It is the moment you stop carrying someone else's guilt in your own body and set it down on the table where it belongs. Now I am asking you, who in your life is being dramatic? Who is sitting at the wrong end of the table waiting to be called by name? Who has been telling you something for years that you have decided is not urgent enough to hear? Listen carefully, not just to heartbeats, to everything people are afraid to say out loud. My mother said that to me when I was 12, and I am saying it to you now. If it means something, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. 18 years ago, no one listened. This morning I finally heard her.